Christians, continuing the series on Exodus 1 that I called Make Egypt Great Again. This is part 2, and it's going to cover the first couple of verses of Exodus chapter 1. It begins by saying in verse 1 of Exodus 1, "Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher." And of course, Joseph was already in Egypt. And then it says that all those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, and Joseph was already in Egypt. And then it says that in verse 6, "And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation." So what's being said here so far is that now Joseph is dead, all of his brothers are dead, and all that generation. So really, the generation of folks, which includes Pharaoh, but the generation of folks that came to Egypt from Israel, all the Hebrews that came with Jacob, they're all dead at this point. They've all died. And it says in verse 6, once again, Joseph died, all of his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So here's what you have to understand. And that is that Jacob and his relatives, 70 in total, when the famine in Egypt took place, because of what happened with Joseph, they were able to come to Egypt by the invitation of Joseph and to live there and to be able to eat and avoid starvation that was resulting from the widespread and prevalent famine. So most of us know the story about how it came to be, about Joseph and his dream and his coat of many colors, his brother selling him into slavery, him going to Egypt, him being thrown in jail, Pharaoh's wife tried to seduce him, the baker, all these kind of things. So I'm not rehashing that for the most part. What I'm trying to deal with right now with this short series is talk about what happens after Joseph was dead, after Pharaoh was dead, and after the generation of the Israelites that came with Jacob to Egypt, what happens to them. But the first thing that we know about them, after all of the principles had died, was that Israel, the children of Israel, made up a large body of people. They made up a large body of people. And if you remember, because this is going to come up later, Joseph had allocated a particular part of Egypt, which was the land of Goshen, for Jacob and the rest of the family to live. They had carved out this part of Egypt where they could go, and that's where they would gather, and that's where they would do their business, that's where they would live, that's where they would raise their flocks, that's where they would have their families and whatnot. But it says in verse 6 that Joseph died and that whole generation. And in verse 7, "But the children of Israel were fruitful, and they had increased abundantly. They had multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty." And it says, "And the land was filled with them." They had no doubt rapidly increased in numbers. And I do believe that it was by God's design that they would do so. Remember that God had made a promise to Abraham that he would multiply his seed. And multiplication, or being multiplied, is exactly what happened. They became very significant in number, a large body of them. And it makes it very clear that it says, "And the land was filled with them." Filled with them. And you have to understand also that the Israelites and the Egyptians had formed a relationship, and for all the time that Joseph was alive, it was a good relationship. It was a good relationship which existed between two communities, the Egyptians and the Israelites. And they got along and things worked. But what we know for sure is this: they grew and they multiplied to great numbers, and they were exceedingly mighty. They were a strong people. They were a large people. They were an industrious people. And so the Bible in Exodus 1 wants us to understand that the significance of their numbers is an important, very important thing, because the new Pharaoh is about to show up, and he has a different vision for the relationship between Egypt and Israel. Be provoked and be persuaded.